They said America was the land of opportunity, and maybe for some it was. But what I saw a different country entirely. I saw children coughing themselves to sleep in tenements so cold, even the rats shivered. Mothers working their fingers raw in sweatshops, while fathers drowned their hopes in cheap whiskey. Because in the alleys of New York, even hope had a price, and most couldn't afford it. My name is Jacob Riis, and in the year 1900, I walked those alleys with a camera in my hand and truth burning in my chest. The newspapers spoke of progress, of railroads and roaring factories, and of a future built on steel and steam. But I saw what that future cost. I saw it in the soot-streaked faces of immigrant children, in the silence of girls hunched over sewing machines for 14 hours straight, in the empty stares of the old men sleeping upright because there was no room to lie down. They called this the American dream. But I tell you now, dreams don't smell like coal smoke and rotting bread. The 20th century didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with smoke, with noise, and with hunger. We lived in overcrowded rooms we didn't own, walked wherever our legs could carry us, ate what was left, and chose what we were given. And still, we were told we should be grateful for what we had and got. But this is not a story of gratitude. This is a story of shadows, of the secrets, and of the truth that hid beneath the shining towers of progress. And if you're willing to look, like really look, I'll show you the America they never wanted you to see. Cities rose like monuments, and railroads carved their way through the heartland. Immigration surged as waves of men, women, and children arrived with names no one could pronounce and dreams no one would grant. But they weren't welcomed. Instead, they were used. I remember one Sicilian boy, Luca. He was 11, bent over a shirt press for 16 hours a day. I asked him what he wanted to be. He looked at me, all confused. He didn't understand the question. But this was New York in 1900. This was a city built on ambition and debt. Technology was primitive, unemployment a heartbeat away, and war simmered in distant continents. In the back rooms of City Hall, corruption thrived, even grew like a dark fungus, contaminating everything it lay its hands on. Tammany Hall ran the city as its private empire. Cops took bribes and judges took orders. And the truth? Well, that was the first thing bought and sold. Boss Tweed, the notorious ringleader, once used municipal funds to build a courthouse that cost New Yorkers millions. His fall would spark a wave of reform, but not in time for Luca. This was the Gilded Age, glib on the outside, rotten underneath. The city's skyline glittered with steel, but below, tenements festered in filth and despair. By 1900, 80,000 tenements housed nearly 2.3 million people, 2/3 of New York's total population. I wasn't just here to take pictures. I was here to expose the soul of a city gasping beneath its own success. The city was cracking under its own weight. Tenements burst at the seams, and men buckled beneath factory whistles and hunger. But if you looked closer, past the soot and past the smoke, you'd see who was really holding it all together: the women. They weren't spared the struggle. In fact, they carried most of it. I met Rose, 23. Her fingers were raw from sewing shirts for 14 hours a day. One child with no husband and no heat, just a pile of sleeves and a fading sense of self. She was simply one of the thousands. In the shirtwaist factories, the air was stale with lint and fear. Wages were barely enough for bread, and each stitch felt like a surrender. The bosses paid in pennies, while the city repaid them in silence. Prostitution wasn't hidden. It was a business. Police didn't shut it down. Instead, they taxed it. And when a working girl went missing, no one asked questions. Only unless she was white. And even then, justice wore a price tag on itself. I'll never forget the name Jenny Boscheider, 17, a factory girl from Patterson. She was drugged, raped, and killed by 4 well-connected men. They called it a tragedy of character, while I called it what it actually was: murder. And still, women endured. They whispered rebellion in alleyways. They didn't wait for the law. They voted with their feet. In 1909, I watched more than 20,000 women, most of them barely out of childhood, walk off the job in protest. Shirtwaist workers demanding dignity, safety, and a fair day's pay. The bosses didn't listen until smoke rose from the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and 146 young women burned behind locked doors. Even in the classroom, the city took them for granted. Women became teachers, not because they were valued, but because they cost less. They were more obedient, overworked, and underpaid. And still, they kept teaching, kept stitching, and kept fighting. The city owed them everything, yet it gave them almost nothing. Meanwhile, crime in 1900 didn't wear masks. It wore uniforms. It sat behind mahogany desks in the plush houses of Manhattan. The neighborhood known as the Tenderloin was infamous. One of its police captains, Alexander Clubber Williams, boasted openly of getting his share of the city's vice. These were men in power, captains, judges, police, conducting crimes with badges. I once found a man's body slumped in a stairwell, a stab wound over disputed gambling debts. The killers vanished, and the police never even looked. And the orphan trains? That was another crime nobody remembers now. Thousands of children shipped west, where some found caring homes, but many were pressed into labor, anonymous servitude. I met a boy outside Syracuse digging coal for 12 hours a day. He didn't know his own last name, just that he once had a sister somewhere. Also, justice didn't come with evidence. It came with your ethnicity. If you were Irish, Italian, Chinese, or black, your trial was decided before questions were asked. Backroom deals in Tammany Hall bought judges and police. Reformers exposed them, like Reverend Charles Parkhurst, who famously called out the city's corruption. His work led to the Lexow Committee hearings in 1892, the first public expose of systematic police bribery and racketeering. One witness, Captain Williams, admitted taking protection money, but no arrests followed because Tammany's power was too deep, too rich. Police raids, like those by the Committee of 15 in the early 1900s, occasionally disrupted brothels and gambling dens, but bosses and vice simply moved on, paying even more for protection. And in August 1900, a racist riot erupted near the Tenderloin after a black man was killed by the police. White mobs tore through black neighborhoods, burning homes, all while officers stood by. A protective race-based code ruled justice. This wasn't just corruption. It was a civic illness, one that killed hope and stained the city's soul. But I didn't just expose it, I fought it. My friend, Theodore Roosevelt, became police commissioner in 1895, promising reform, merit-based promotions, and patrols that actually worked. Together, we tore down the worst of the lodging houses and shut out the wheelers and dealers. We were turning the tide bit by bit, but the rot, it ran deep. Children are said to be resilient, but I saw something different. I saw resilience bent by desperation. In the tenements of Mulberry Bend and the alleys of Five Points, survival wasn't noble, it was a sentence. Kids didn't dream of becoming doctors or teachers. They dreamt of waking up without hunger, gnawing at their bellies, of not burying another sibling to diphtheria, and of not sharing a rat-infested straw mattress with strangers. Many became bootblacks or newsboys, selling newspapers they couldn't read for a penny a copy. Some drifted into factories, their small hands perfect for cleaning dangerous machines. But most, when necessity pressed them, with no choice, turned to crime. New York's underworld wasn't just adult criminals. It had become an industrial machine fueled by children. Fagin-like figures prowled the streets, recruiting kids into pickpocketing gangs, teaching them to swipe purses and vanish into the crowd. In one case, a boy not much older than 10 traded a stolen brooch for bread and liquor. He didn't see theft as sin, but as duty. His mother was bedridden and his sister hungry. Stealing wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Pickpocket gangs filled newspaper pages. In the 1880s and 90s, groups like the Crazy Butch Gang and Dutch Mob terrorized the Lower East Side, staging street fights as distractions, then lifting wallets from bystanders. And when children grew up in cheap lodging houses, places known as breeding grounds for crime, it was only natural they followed the path they saw laid out before them. By 1889, 1 out of every 8 arrests in the city was a child under 20. I noted dozens of cases, highwaymen at 6 years old, burglaries at 10, even murders by 14. But who cleans up after broken children? The police did, sometimes. More often they didn't. Many officers were on the take, cutting deals with Fagin types, turning a blind eye to murder, prostitution, vice, as long as their own pockets were lined. Leading reformers eventually cracked down. Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt, my friend, did away with exploitative lodging houses, introduced merit-based hiring, and rid the force of obvious corruption. But the damage was done. A girl named Mina lived under Hester Street. Her parents were gone, while she swept butcher shops for a few cents a day. At night, she traced her mother's name into the dirt floor. Mama! What did she remember? Warm hands and soup. That and nothing else. So if someone asks me, was it really that bad? I answered, yes, worse. Because this city didn't just ignore its poor, it used them. And when they broke, it swept them under the rug. The factories also devoured lives simultaneously. On March 20th, 1905, the Grover Shoe Factory in Brockton, Massachusetts, a thriving wooden complex known as the Shoe City, was ripped apart by a boiler explosion powerful enough to level its 4-story structure and collapse it like a house of cards. The blast, equivalent to hundreds of pounds of dynamite, ignited naphtha stored nearby, turning the building into an inferno and claiming 58 lives, injuring around 150 more. These workers, mostly women, were crushed beneath collapsing floors, trapped by debris and flames. Many were never identified, 39 unidentified victims were buried together in a communal grave at Melrose Cemetery. Factory bosses had been warned. Inspectors flagged the boiler's hidden defects, but repairs were deemed too costly. The fix? Run the old reserve boiler, already 2 stories too small for the expanding building. The gamble failed, but the management saved money, while the workers paid with their lives. America paved its streets with blood and coal ash. Rivers ran black as skies were soot-lashed. By 1900, industrial accidents claimed around 35,000 American lives per year. The Grover disaster was just one amongst a nationwide crisis. Boiler explosions, frequently due to rusted plates, poor design, and ignored safety, killed 2,000 boilers between 1880 and 1890 alone. The impact was far-reaching. Massachusetts passed its first boiler inspection law in 1908. Ohio followed, and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers implemented a national boiler code by 1915. But the change came too little and too late for Brockton. Entire city blocks burned. Relief efforts raised over $105,000 for victims' families and survivors. A granite memorial still stands in Melrose Cemetery for those who perished. America's industrial growth had a human cost, and it was measured in pain and loss. They said progress, I once wrote, but they forgot to mention who would pay. And if you stayed quiet, if you fed the machine, you survived another day. But if you spoke out, you risked everything. Because that was the deal. You kept quiet and fed the machine, or the machine fed on you. I didn't take photographs to inspire pity, but to leave proof. Proof that we once let our fellow man rot behind locked doors and barred windows. Proof that this country and this promise was built not just on dreams, but on the backs of the forgotten. I exposed the slums. I revealed street Arabs, children sleeping in alley vents, so no one could deny what they saw with their own eyes. And now, though I've passed, I've returned, not in flesh, but in voice, to whisper these truths into your ears. So maybe, just maybe, we won't forget again. Because the bones are still beneath your feet. What do you think? Have we changed, or have we simply just chosen to forget? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to check our previous video on the orphan trains.